now.
Okay. Right, we'll get started. Welcome to those in attendance at this remote meeting of the Local Review Board of Aberdeen City Council. My name is Councillor Dale Henriksson and I'll be chairing the meeting today. Councillors Lynn Thompson and Kieran van Sweden are also in attendance and will be participating. Please note that the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. You are also reminded to note that we may have members of the public or press observing today's proceedings. Can members of the review body leave their camera on but mute their microphone when not speaking? And can I ask those who are observing today's meeting to keep their microphones and cameras switched off throughout? As a local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the meeting during consideration of any of the reviews. This meeting has been convened in response to 3 requests for a review of the decision taken by the appropriate officer under the council scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I will now ask Mr. Mark Mason, the assistant clerk, to outline the procedure to be followed in the conduct of these reviews.
Thank you, Chair. Members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure. And by that, it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, of which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replaced that with the local review body, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner in 2011 stated that reviews of local review bodies should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you. And I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you. Councillor Henriksson, your mic's still on.
Sorry. Turning to consideration of the first review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for subdivision of existing detached steading to form 2 dwellings and formation of a parking courtyard at North Steading, South Lynn, Lynmore Road, Peter Cooter, Aberdeen, AB14 OPD, planning reference 210771/DPP. We will now hear the planning advisor in attendance, Miss Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would point out that Miss Green attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because she has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Ms Green will not, however, be asked to express any view on the merits of the proposed development, and in fact, her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Over to you, Ms Green.
Thank you, convener. I'll just share my screen now. So the review has been submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer, with the decision notice having been issued on the 8th of February and the notice of review dated the 6th of May. And the applicant has indicated on the notice of review that there are no new matters been raised in the review submissions. And in terms of the procedure by which the review will be conducted, the applicant has expressed the view that the review can proceed on the basis of the information submitted. So I'll just provide some background information before handing back. So this is showing the application site, which extends to approximately 1.44 hectares and contains a detached steading building, which had been previously converted into a single house, and it's also its associated parking and garden area. And the application site boundary also includes a large area of agricultural land to the north and northeast of the site, that area there. And it's within the control of the applicant, but doesn't form part of the domestic curtilage. And access to the site is taken from the south along Lynmore Road, from the A93, which is approximately 1.7 kilometres to the south. And the site is located within the Greenbelt, surrounded by open fields to the north and east. I'll just move to there. And by residential properties to the west and south. And South Lynn Cottage is located further to the north. There are also oil and gas pipelines passing through and adjacent to the application site. And that's the aerial taken from Google Images, with the yellow star showing the application site. And this is the proposed site plan. So the proposal relates to the subdivision of the existing single house, which is contained within a detached steading. And the proposal is to form 2 dwellings with associated alterations and formation of courtyard. The external alterations proposed would include new door, 2 roof lights, and 2 new doors on the northeast elevation and 2 sun tunnels. And a flue is also proposed on the roof of the northeast elevation. The garden would also be split and parking areas provided. But the extent of residential curtilage wouldn't change as a result of the proposal. So this is showing the existing floor plans, the ground floor plan here at the bottom, and then the first floor plan. So you can see that part of the building is only a single story. These 2 elements have got a first floor. And the floor plans as proposed. So the property would be split at this point. This 1 dwelling would be formed in this area, and the other dwelling would be the L-shaped remainder of the steading there. And again, at first floor level, the L-shaped property at the bottom, and then this is the other property. And these are the elevations. As I mentioned earlier, the only changes are the addition of roof light, the 2 sun tunnels, and door openings. You can see those on the elevations. So the split, looking at the elevations, 1 house would be within this sort of taller element, and then the other one within the lower L-shaped area of the building. And those are the other elevations. So again, the taller part of the steading would form one of the units, with the lower part forming the other one. That's the L-shaped area. So in terms of consultations, there were no objections from the roads team, environmental health, Scottish Water, or the waste team. The health and safety executive did not advise against granting of planning permission. And the INEOS pipeline, there was no objection, but a request for a condition for the developer to consult with them. Shell pipeline, there was no objection, and from Cooter Community Council, also no objection. One objection was received, and that stated that the existing property is accessed via a single farm track, which is struggling to cope with the current traffic loads generated by the 5 properties it serves, and that 2 additional properties would have a detrimental impact on the access track. That the reference there to 2 additional properties was obviously prior to the revision of the application, which originally came in proposing 2 additional properties, and it's now just 1 additional. So turning to the reasons for refusal, this was based on the Greenbelt policy, and that obviously contains a general presumption against development. And so the reason was that the proposal doesn't fall into any of the specified types of acceptable development. The wording's a bit funny there, but it also fails to meet any of the exceptions set out in the Greenbelt policy. And it's therefore contrary to that policy. And for the applicant, the statement on the applicant's behalf was that the property has 2 living rooms and 6 double bedrooms, and the proposal is to split into 2 units. It would have minimal external alterations and would result in 2 3-bed properties of a more standard size. And they also made the point that the properties would house fewer people in total, and that the proposal would not harm the character of the Greenbelt nor contravene that policy. So at this point, I'll hand back to the convener for the review body to decide whether to proceed with the determination or require further procedure. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Green. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members, remember that if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request that further written information be provided, hearings be arranged, or a site visit undertaken. I feel that I've got enough information today to make a decision. Councillor Thompson, could you please state if you have sufficient information to take a decision, and if you do not feel any further procedures are required, please state for the minute the reason why.
Okay, thank you, convener. I do feel I've got enough information to come to a decision today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Van Sweden, could you please state if you have sufficient information to take a decision, and if you do not feel any further procedures are required, please state for the minutes the reason why.
Yes, I have enough information to take a decision.
Thank you, Councillor Van Sweden. As members feel that they have sufficient information, we will now hear from Ms. Green on the relevant policies and consideration for this review.
Thank you. Just one moment. Sorry, sharing the wrong screen there. No, that's not right either. Sorry, it's just giving me the screen numbers and not showing me what's on them, so it's not very helpful. Try again. Right. Okay, that should be showing you the Greenbelt policy. So the site lies within the Greenbelt, and Greenbelt policy was the reason given by the case officer for the refusal. So this slide just shows you the exceptions within that policy. So there's a general presumption against development with the following exceptions. And the first one, the development is within the boundary of the existing activity. B, the development is small scale. C, the intensity of activity is not significantly increased. Now that's the one that the case officer felt the policy contravened. And D, any proposed built construction is ancillary to what exists. And then the Greenbelt policy also contains a criteria which relates to reusing buildings of historic or architectural interest. And finally, all developments within the Greenbelt would be of the highest quality in terms of siting and design. So it's really up to members to decide whether you feel the intensity of activity is significantly increased in terms of Greenbelt policy. Just moving on to the other relevant policies. So the proposal is for residential development. So policy H1 is relevant with, in particular, the impact on the character and amenity of the area being relevant. That's also a consideration under the Greenbelt policy. Design policy, which I'll just show you on the next slide. Policy D5 encourages the retention of granite buildings. Policies T2 and T3 relate to transport and sustainable travel, and these state that development must demonstrate that sufficient measures have been taken to minimise traffic, and that new development must be accessible by a range of transport modes, especially sustainable and active travel. We've already covered Greenbelt policy NE2, NE8 natural heritage, that seeks to ensure that natural heritage interests are protected, such as protected species and habitats. Policy B6 on pipelines, that relates to the consultations with the pipeline operators that I mentioned earlier. And R6 on waste requirements, that's refuse provision. And we've seen that the waste team were consulted. They provided information, but no objection. And finally, policy CI1 on digital infrastructure. That contains a requirement for high-speed internet connections for new dwellings. So just moving on to the policy on design that you'll be familiar with for most of these reviews. Ensure high standards of design with a strong and distinctive sense of place. And that kind of echoes what's within the Greenbelt policy as well. And finally, the evaluation, there's the primacy of the development plan policies, with applications being determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So, basis for decision. Do members consider that the proposed development would comply with the policy on the Greenbelt? And in terms of residential policy as well, what's the impact on the character and amenity of the area? So I'll hand back to you at that point. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Sorry about that. Do members have any questions for Ms. Green?
Yes, I do.
Councillor Van Sweden.
With regards to sustainable travel, it does mention that they're referring to a new development, whereas this development is not new per se. This is an old building which is being redeveloped. What is the thinking with that?
Well, by new development, you know, the fact that it requires planning permission, although it's not in a new building, development is also the creation of two dwellings from what was the single dwelling. So that's the meaning of development in this instance. So that policy would still be relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Councillor, are you happy, Councillor Van Sweden?
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, convener. I'd just like to clarify around the exception criterion that the original planning officer didn't think was met around intensity of activity, and just a bit of clarification around what that means and what is the intensity compared against, if you like. I mean, this is one current dwelling being split into two, so it could be seen as small scale, but on the other hand, it's one becoming two, so it's doubling. So it's just a little bit of clarification about how you make that, how that judgment is made around balancing the intensity of activity.
Yeah, I mean, we would look at things like, you know, the numbers of people likely to be living there, the associated travel, I suppose associated things like garden use. I mean, it is quite difficult in this instance because it's quite a subtle change. So it's really a matter of what members feel about that. It's obviously two smaller dwellings. I don't think I can add anything else to that, really.
Any more questions? Because I have a couple.
I guess probably the thing that I'm noting most is that the planning is talking about additional properties, and I think for most of us we would view additional properties as increasing the floor space rather than it be a division of a property, which obviously arithmetically is two different concepts. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ms. Green?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the splitting of the existing floor space into two separate dwellings. So because that requires planning permission, you know, that it's an additional dwelling rather than additional floor space. You're right that there's that subtle difference.
Right, I have a question. So we're not looking at an increase in numbers of potential people living there because the numbers aren't going to change. Would that be correct?
Well, I mean, obviously we don't know. You know, before there were 6 bedrooms and 2 living rooms, and there'll still be 6 bedrooms, but 2 separate houses. We don't know how many people.
Yeah. I do have the objection from the previous plans. Would that be relevant with this one, considering that the plans have changed, so there's not a new property being built, but I'm just wondering how the objection would fit in with the amended application.
I mean, it's still relevant in terms of, you know, we wouldn't set that aside because it's a revised proposal, but obviously we'd read it in the context of the revisions that have taken place. So, you know, I suppose it's whether it's a matter of opinion, whether we feel there'd be additional traffic, for example,
Right,
because there are 2 houses. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I have one general question. What's a sun tunnel? I'm not actually good. That was mentioned. I think I know what it is, but it's the first time I've heard it referred to in a planning application.
Well, it's usually where you have a pitched roof and you want to take a sort of like a roof light through it, you would have a sort of reflective material that forms a tunnel within the roof space, so that the light's reflected. So it's like a long tunnel that you wouldn't have anything extending above the top of it.
Right.
It's like a extended roof light, I suppose.
No, thank you for that. That's what I thought it was, but I thought I'd check up. It's always good to know. Are there any more questions? No, I see shaking heads. In accordance with the procedure note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. We now come to the determination. I'm actually minded to overturn the officer's decision. I think when we look at the exemptions in the policy, I'm quite happy that it meets the exemption A. The development is within the boundary of the existing activity. Nothing's externally is changing. The development is small scale, and any proposed build construction is ancillary to what exists. Well, there's no, as far as I can tell, there's no additional building going on. And C is the interesting one. The intensity of activity is not significantly increased. I don't see it being increased. If there's three double bedrooms there now, 6 double bedrooms there now, and there's still going to be 6 double bedrooms there, I don't see the activity at the site increasing, and that's why I'm happy to overturn the officer's recommendation and approve the application. Councillor Thompson, can you please state your decision in respect of the application and state for the minute the grounds for that decision, referring to the planning policy where appropriate?
Thank you, convener. I'm minded to go with you and overturn the decision, having heard the relevant arguments. That criterion about what's the wording? Intensity of activity does seem to be quite subjective in a way, and open to interpretation. And I think going by the size of this development and its existing footprint, I would be happy to go ahead with overturning the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Van Sweden.
Yes, I would concur with both of you, Councillor Henrickson and Councillor Thompson. I think I would concur with all the things you've both said, but I would also add to that, yes, I think for the majority of people, you would see an additional property as an increase of a use of ground space in this instance, and also the sustainable travel aspect to it as well. I think that's what I'm concerned about with that is, are we then saying people can't live in the countryside? So this is my thinking and why I'm concurring with both of you.
Thank you, Councillor Van Sweden. As the local review board has agreed to overturn the decision of the appointed officer, we now need to consider whether any conditions should be attached to the approval of the application. Are there any conditions that you think we should be applying to this?
So
sorry.
Oh.
Ms. Green. I think I might have.
Sorry, should I speak?
No, that's not for the moment. Ms. Green, you coming in there?
There was a condition requested by one of the pipeline operators for the developer to discuss with them. So there was that one. You might want to attach a condition about withdrawing permitted development rights, or about to, people can build small extensions under permitted development. So you could withdraw those rights or not.
Right, thank you, Thank you for coming in there, Ms. Green. Yes, I'm happy for both of those conditions to be placed. Councillor Van Sweden.
Yes, I guess my concern is for the amount of traffic on the road. It is perhaps something, I don't know if this is something that we can do here, but it's perhaps something that the owner needs to think about in relationship to his neighbours going forward.
Yeah, I'm not sure we could actually condition anything to do with that.
You know, obviously, Councillor Henriksen, this is my first.
Yes, no, that's fine. We all go through a learning process with these things. It's a little bit more intense than the planning committee, because you're actually looking at policies in a more specific way. But yeah, I would be happy with the conditions as raised by Ms. Green. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, convener. Just to say, yes, I'd be happy with the condition about permitted development, because I think in this decision we've made quite a balanced judgment about the intensity of activity, and I think if we were to allow, if permitted development was permitted, you could potentially see an increase in the number of bedrooms and floor space, which is, I mean, this doesn't feel like an absolutely cut and dried. There's a few shades of grey in there, and I think if permitted developments were to be allowed and go ahead, that could significantly increase the intensity of activity. So I think in this instance, adding that as a condition would be a wise thing to do.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. So I think we're all agreed there that the application be approved with the two conditions regarding permitted development and liaising with the pipeline company. Right. Okay. Please note that the decision notice from today's meeting will be issued to the applicant and agent after the meeting. Thank you very much for that one. Moving on, now turning to the second review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the erection of a 1.5 storey and single storey extensions and installation of roof lights to the rear of 55 Argyle Place, Aberdeen, AB 252HU, planning reference number 22022-1/DPP. We will now hear from the planning advisor in attendance, Ms. Green, who will provide us with the brief description of the application and proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would again point out that Ms. Green also attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance, because she has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Ms. Green will not, however, be asked to express any view on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Back to you, Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. I'll just share my screen again. Okay, so the review into the proposal for a 1.5 storey and single storey extensions at 55 Argyle Place. This has been submitted with all the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the decision by the appointed officer. So the decision notice was dated the 18th of May and the notice of review received 10th of June. And the applicant has indicated that there are no new matters within the submissions. In terms of procedure, the applicant has expressed the view that the review may proceed on the basis of the information submitted. So I'll provide some background information now. So this is the site location plan and the site lies on Argyle Place opposite Victoria Park and within the Rosemount Conservation Area. It's a category B listed and is an end terrace house with 1 3/4 stories in height and built in solid granite. And the application for planning permission was also accompanied by an application for listed building consent, which was also refused. So this is just showing you the overhead photograph of the site there with the yellow star. And the 3D image from Google. So you can see the existing rear extensions there, single story. And moving on to the site plan with the proposed extensions. So this is showing the existing extension having been removed and the 1.5 and single story extensions as proposed. And it's just showing the existing garage accessed from Mile End Lane. So these are the existing elevations. And as I mentioned, it's built in granite, and unusually there's this chimney stack on the rear elevation, like the 3rd chimney it's referred to in the report. And the existing extension here, is built in local granite with a slate roof. Existing sections through the building. So this is just showing the rear extension at the moment with the chimney on the rear elevation and the frontage of the house there. And that section taken at a different point where, at the point where the rear extension is not present at the back. So moving on to the proposed elevations. So detailed planning permission is sought for the erection of the rear extension, which contains a double story and a single story components. And there's also the installation of roof light. And the extension projects up to 4.5 meters out from the principal rear elevation. Its overall width is 8 meters and it's set 1.3 meters off the southern boundary and 1.18 meters off the northern boundary. And the single story part of the extension would have an eaves height of 3.5 meters to that point there, with a flat roof, whilst the 2-story part of the extension would have an eaves height of 4.82 meters and a ridge height of 6.15 meters. And that second 2-story element projects out a further ½ meter in front of the single story element. So the west elevation of the extension would be predominantly glazed across both floor levels with timber cladding surrounding that. And that would also be the finish on the southern elevation. The granite from the downtakings would be finish the northern elevation. And roof lights would be incorporated into both roof planes of the 2-story pitched roof and one in the flat roof of the single story element. And there were some revisions to the application. These included retention of the chimney on the rear elevation of the house. The width of the extension was reduced. The smooth render was removed from the proposal and the existing granite within the building to be demolished. The rear extension to be demolished was integrated into the ground floor of the extension. And this is just showing the proposed south elevation and then a visual that was submitted with the application. And that just shows the reuse of some of the granite from the single story existing extension. And that's showing the existing ground floor plan and the proposed ground floor plan. We can see that this has been removed and replaced with the proposed extensions. And at first floor level, it's obviously just showing the roof of the existing extension and then the proposed first floor of the proposed extension. Sections through the proposal. This is obviously taken through the existing house, showing the sort of length of the two-storey element of the proposal, and this one the same but showing the single-storey element, and then through the extension itself. Sorry about that. Right, moving on to the reasons for refusal. These are stated in full in the report of handling in the agenda, but the key points are reasons for refusal were the excessive scale and massing, which was considered would have an adverse impact on the character, setting and appearance of the Category B listed building and the terrace, and similarly would be detrimental to the character of the Rosemount and Westburn Conservation Area. And the proposal overall be contrary to policies H1 residential areas, D1 on design, D4 on historic environment, and policy and guidance from Historic Environment Scotland. It was further considered that the design merits of the roof light and reuse of granite would not outweigh the matters above. For the applicant's case, various points were made. That the rear elevations have been extended and altered over time, and that the proposed extension is a modern interpretation of the form of surrounding properties, and that materials are high quality, including reusing granite from the existing extension, that the layout allows the preservation of the stair and the principal rooms within the house, that the extension is positioned to reduce the impact on neighbours and it complies with daylighting guidelines, and that it represents an increase in floor space of only 18%, that the height of the roof is subservient to the original house and respects its character, that it's obviously a modern addition, and that the architectural character of the listed building has been retained, and that the extension would adapt the house for modern living, allowing the use of the building for the next 100 years. In terms of consultations and representations, there were no objections from the roads team or from the community council, and there was one representation received which objected to the proposal, and it raised various matters. The proximity of the extension to 57 Argyle Place, which it was stated would lead to a loss of daylighting and outlook to the neighbouring property. That the proposed two-storey height of the extension would result in a loss of sunlight and increase overshadowing within the rear garden of 57 Argyle Place. So at this point, I will hand back to the convener for a decision on the further procedure. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Green. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members, remember that if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request that further written information be provided, hearings be arranged, or a site visit be undertaken. I feel that I've got sufficient information to make a decision today. Councillor Thompson, could you please state if you have sufficient information to take a decision, and if you do not feel any further procedures are required, please state for the minutes the reason why.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I feel we've got enough information to take a decision today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Van Sweden, could you please state if you have sufficient information to take a decision, and if you do not feel any further procedures are required, please state for the minute the reason why.
Yep, thank you, convener. I have enough information.
Thank you, Councillor Van Sweden. As members feel that they have sufficient information, we will now hear from Ms Green on the relevant policies and considerations of this review. Thank you, Ms Green.
Thanks. I'll share my screen again. Okay, so the proposal lies within an area zoned under policy H1, residential areas, and this states that residential development is acceptable in principle, subject to various criteria. The main one being the second point relating to character and amenity of the area. Just on overdevelopment before, on number 1 criteria, the householder guide includes the rule of thumb that in excess of 50% of usable garden space should remain undeveloped, and secondly, that the footprint of the proposed development should not be more than double the size of the house. So the case officer didn't feel that criteria 1 had been contravened. It was the second criteria on character and amenity that they were looking at. There's no loss of open space in this proposal, and there are various supplementary guidance that are relevant, in particular the householder guide. So moving on to the policy on the historic environment. The policy seeks to preserve the character of conservation areas, in this case the Rosemount Conservation Area, and in that regard it advocates high quality design, and it's noted that the character appraisal for that conservation area, that this is one of the important terraces of listed buildings facing onto the park. I'm just looking at the other relevant policies. Policy D5, our granite heritage, that seeks to preserve granite buildings. Scottish planning policy and historic environment Scotland policy, as well as the managing change guidance notes. These all seek to preserve the character of listed buildings and conservation areas, which is based on traditional granite buildings and their traditional features. So in particular, the HES guidance on extensions states that these must protect the character and appearance of the parent building by being subordinate in scale and form, located on secondary elevations, and must be designed in a high quality manner using appropriate materials. And the guidance also recognises that historic buildings, such as the application property, vary in the extent to which they can accommodate change without loss to the special architectural interest, and that extensions have the potential to impact on the setting of adjacent historic buildings, which should be taken into account when considering a proposal. This is design policy D1, which advocates high quality of design, distinctive sense of place. And overall, in terms of determining the application, the primacy of the development plan, with applications being determined in accordance with the development plan policies unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And so the basis for the decision is, would the proposal comply with policies on the historic environment, including the national guidance? What would the impact be on the character of the conservation area and the amenity of the surrounding area. I'll hand back to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I do apologise. I think the Teams thing is looking slightly different. I think they've upgraded it. I'm getting lost. Are there any questions from Ms. Green? Seeing shaking heads. I'm just asked a little bit of clarification that within the conservation area, you gave the implication that the front of the building, which overlooks the park, is of primary importance. How does the rear of the buildings in a conservation area and a listed building, is that given equal? I'm trying to think of the word, equal importance, bearing in mind that I've had a look on Google Earth and it is actually visible from one of the lanes. Would you say that the view from the lane was as important of a listed building as the view from the front and the impact of the rear of the building if it was visible?
It depends on the merit of the building in many cases. In terms of listed building, it's, you know, it may not be visible from anywhere, but you would still be looking at the character of the building and its setting, even if it wasn't publicly visible. From the conservation area point of view, the character appraisal does emphasize the front of the terrace in this instance as being especially important, but the rear elevation is still important. It's still visible from within, you know, the conservation area, so that's a consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Are there any other questions? No, I'm seeing shaking heads. Just so in accordance with the procedures notes circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. I'm going to uphold the officer's recommendation. I think it's really important to preserve our listed buildings. I know that the proposed development isn't necessarily seen from the primary view, but I think it's very important to actually preserve all parts of a listed building. So I will be supporting the officer's recommendation on the grounds of policy D4. I was also concerned with the with regards to the use of the materials. I certainly don't think that timber framed is particularly a good use in a conservation area and on a listed building, so that gives further concerns as to this. Councillor Thompson, can you please state your decision in respect to the application and state for the minute the grounds for that decision, referring to planning policy where appropriate?
Thank you, convener. Yes, I would be minded to uphold the decision of the planning officers in this instance. My reasoning behind that is looking at the guidance from Historic Environment Scotland about extensions being subordinate in form and not having an undue impact on adjacent buildings. I think that would apply here, which would fit with policy H1 about the unacceptable impact on the character of the area, which in policy D4 of course is with regard to our historic environment, just recognising the fact that this building is a listed building and it is within the Rosemount Conservation Area.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Van Sweden, please state your decision in respect for the application and state for the minute the grounds for that decision, referring to planning policy where appropriate.
Yes, I would concur with both yourself and Councillor Thompson. that I would uphold the officer's decision, and that's because I feel that the effect on the parent building is excessive. It doesn't have an acceptable impact. And with yourself as well, convener, the timber frame doesn't fit with the building as it is, and the fact that it's in a conservation area. So yeah, I would uphold the officer's decision.
Thank you, Councillors Van Sweden. For the local review board, that's therefore agreed to unanimously uphold the decision of the appointed officer, and the application is therefore refused. Please note that the decision notice from today's meeting will be issued to the appropriate agent after the meeting. Now, turning to the third review, in respect to the decision to refuse the application for the erection of a two-storey extension to the front/side of 9A Overton Crescent, Crescent Dice AB21 7FW, planning reference number 220422/DPP. We will again hear from the planning advisor, Ms. Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. Back to you, Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. Right. Seems to be a bit of a delay when I try and share. Okay, as you mentioned, this is review into the two-storey extension at 9A Overton Crescent, and the application was refused under delegated powers. The review was submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months, with a decision notice having been dated 27th of June and the notice of review received on the 30th of June. And the applicant has indicated no new matters have been raised. In terms of procedure, the applicant has expressed the view on this one that there should be a site visit to inspect the site rather than proceeding on the basis of the information submitted. So I'll first provide some background information before handing back to you, convener, to discuss the case and decide on the procedure in this review. So that's the location plan. This is a modern two-storey detached dwelling with front, side and rear curtilage, and it fronts onto Overton Crescent, which is a cul-de-sac with semicircular arrangement shared with other dwellings, and it's bounded on all sides by residential properties and their gardens. In 1999, there was a detailed planning permission for the erection of a dwelling house approved conditionally at 9 Overton Crescent, and it's thought that the application house, now known as 9A, was the original house and that number 9 was added by that 2000 permission, although the plans weren't actually available, but that's what I've ascertained from it. So this is the aerial photograph, just showing the house in question, and the proposal is for the two-storey extension in this corner next to the existing projecting gable. Sorry, and this, pointing at the wrong screen, this in this corner would be the extension. And the 3D image shows the houses a bit better. It's this corner that's the one in question. And that's street view from the end of the cul-de-sac. And this is the application site house. So the proposed extension would be just to the side of this. It is set back a bit from the projecting gable. And looking at the plan as proposed, that's the roof of the proposed extension just in the corner there. And the proposed floor plans, the ground floor and the upper floor. The extension would be 2.77 metres wide by 3.47 metres in length, and it would be 1.08 metres off the boundary at the closest point. And the southeast corner of number 9, the adjacent house, is 2 metres from the boundary at that closest point. So looking at the elevations, this is the proposed and existing elevations from the front of the house. The roof tiles would match the existing, and the other finishes would be cement timber effect cladding and Fife stone with UPVC windows. And looking at the proposed and existing side elevation, you can see the extension added in this proposed elevation. So in terms of reasons for refusal, these are stated in full in the report of handling. The key points are that the layout, composition, form and scale within the cul-de-sac of the proposal within the cul-de-sac would harm visual amenity and the character of the street, and the proposal lacks architectural compatibility due to its massing and lack of glazing, and that it would therefore be contrary to policies H1 residential areas and D1 on design. For the applicants, they state that 9A was the host property for a property split, as I mentioned earlier, and that it's already had a 2-storey extension to the front. That the front door to number 9, that's the neighbouring house, has always been set back with an entrance ramp, and the proposed extension doesn't impact on the amenity space or cause overshadowing. That the existing 2-storey extension, by that they mean the projecting gable, breaks the radial development line, the building line they mean there, and that the scale and materials are consistent with the existing property, that the window openings relate to the uses of the rooms behind, and that large openings would overpower the elevation. So in terms of consultations, there were no comments from DICE and Stonywood Community Council, and there were no representations received. So I'll hand back to you, convener, for a decision on the procedure.
Thank you, Ms. Green. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on this application. Members, remember that if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request that a site visit be undertaken, that further written information be provided, or that a hearing be arranged. I'm happy with the information that's been provided today, and I'm more than happy to make a decision. Councillor Thompson, could you please state, excuse me, if you have sufficient information to take a decision, and if you do not feel any further procedures are required, please state for the minutes the reason why.
Thank you, convener, and to confirm, I'm happy to go ahead and take a decision today on the available information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Van Sweden, could you please state if you have sufficient information to take a decision, and if you do not feel any further procedures are required, please state for the minute the reason why.
Convener, I feel I have enough information.
Thank you, Councillor Van Sweden. As members feel they have sufficient information, we will now hear from Ms. Green on the relevant planning policies and considerations for this review. Thank you. Back to you, Ms. Green.
Thanks, convener. Right, just move the slides on to the policies. Firstly, the house lies within an area zoned under policy H1 residential areas. And within these areas, residential development is acceptable in principle, subject to various criteria. Firstly, doesn't constitute overdevelopment. And secondly, the impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area. In terms of the third criteria, there is no open space involved in this case, and supplementary guidance, the Householder Development Guide, is relevant. So looking at the Householder Development Guide, this provides guidance on the issue of overdevelopment. And it states that the built footprint as extended shouldn't exceed twice the original house, and that no more than 50% of the front or rear curtilage shall be covered. Obviously, the case officer didn't feel that those guidance had been contravened in this instance. The Householder Guide also states that extensions should be architecturally compatible in design and scale with the house and surrounding area. And it also states that two-storey extensions to the side may be acceptable subject to the criteria above. That's architectural compatibility. For front extensions, this is a side and front extension, so it doesn't fit neatly into the guidance particularly, but for front extensions, that guidance is that they should be of a scale and design complementary to the dwelling, with careful consideration to the impact on adjacent properties, visual amenity, any building line, and the position of adjacent buildings. So just moving on to the design policy. And as we've seen before, this seeks to ensure high standards of design, creating a strong and distinctive sense of place. In terms of evaluation, again, the primacy of the development plan, with all applications being determined in accordance with the policies unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And moving on to the basis for the decision, this is really looking at policy H1 residential areas and the design. How would it affect character and amenity of the area? Okay, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Excuse me. Do members have any questions for Ms. Green? No, no. I think I have one. Is when you're talking about the amenity of the air, the impact on the amenity of an area. The perspective of that is from all points within the area. So you would say that looking at it from the main road before you go up into the circle doesn't have any sort of precedence to looking at it from straight on. It's irrespective of the angle that you're looking at it and within the area. Is that correct?
Yes, surrounding streets and from neighbouring properties. So yes, all of those are relevant.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Any more questions? No, I haven't any further. Excuse me. I do have a bit of a summer cold, so I'm suffering a bit this morning. In accordance with the procedural note, circulated, the review body will discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to this case have been considered and taken into account. Now we come to the determination. And in this case, I'm going to uphold the officer's decision. I think I'm not sure if I can do this, but in the previous one, we were looking at a conservation area, but I do actually think that preserving the amenity of even the newer developments is still important. And I do find that the design of the thing would actually have an impact on the amenity of the area. I'm also quite concerned about the impact that it would have on the property next door. I know it was mentioned that the site was subdivided, and that the new 9 is, it was implied that it was subservient to 9A because that was the new property, but I don't think we can take that into account. And I do think that the looking at from what I can gather, the amenity of 9A would be affected, and as in with policy H1, I do think that it would have an impact on the amenity of the area, so I would be moving to uphold the officer's decision. Councillor Thompson, can you please state your decision in respect of the application and state for the minute the grounds for that decision, referring to planning policy where appropriate?
Thank you, convener. Yes, I'm also minded to uphold the officer's decision. My reasons for that are the unacceptable impact on the visual amenity of the area, and also looking at the householder development guide, where it states that any front extension shouldn't have a detrimental impact on adjacent properties. And plus, much of that area is sort of 1.5 storey, and the current building already looks, it's quite substantial, and I think that this would just be adding to that. So in terms of planning policy, I think H1 and D1 would be where this application falls short for me, and I'd be minded to uphold officer's decision.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Van Sweden, could you please state, excuse me, your decision in respect of the application and state for the minute the grounds for that decision, referring to planning policy where appropriate?
Yes, convener, I would also uphold the officer's decision as well, for the reasons of the refusal. Fundamentally, the layout, composition, form and scale within the cul-de-sac would harm visual amenity and the character of the street, lacks architectural compatibility due to massing and lacking of glazing. With yourself, I'm concerned about the effect it would have on the neighbour. And there's another smaller thing that is included in that, is also that's mentioned later, are the size of the windows as well in the actual development. But yeah, I would uphold the officer's decision.
Thank you, Councillor Van Sweden. The local review body has therefore agreed to unanimously uphold the decision of the appointed officer, and the application is therefore refused. Oh, excuse me. Please note that the decision notice from today's meeting will be issued to the applicant or the agent in the forthcoming days. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Councillor Thompson and Councillor Van Sweden, who this is a first LRB, and I know it's an interesting process. And thank you to Lucy Green and Mark Mason, Mr. Mason, for attending. And I now call the meeting to an end. Thank you very much.
Thank you.